The guards' hands bit into Abby's arms as they dragged her forward through the Hall of Stars, her bare feet sliding across the polished obsidian floor. Every member of the High Court had assembled for this. Hundreds of immortal faces watching with expressions that ranged from cold satisfaction to casual indifference. The void portal loomed at the far end of the hall, a swirling mass of darkness and silver lightning that hummed with destructive power. "Please," Abby gasped, her voice cracking. "I've served faithfully for 20 years. I've never—" "Silence!" High Counselor Dracos commanded from his elevated seat. His ancient face was carved from contempt. "We've tolerated your presence long enough, half-blood. Your immortal taint poisons this court." Lady Isleen rose from her position beside the High Lord's empty throne, her silver gown flowing like liquid moonlight. She was everything Abby wasn't. Pure-blooded High Fae, beautiful beyond mortal comprehension, and utterly cruel. "The blood test doesn't lie," she said, holding up a crystal vial that contained Abby's blood. It swirled with muddy brown instead of the luminous silver of true Fae blood. "Look at it. Barely a drop of magic. You're nothing but a mortal pretending to be one of us." Abby's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd been a servant in the Twilight Court since she was a child, abandoned at the gates with no memory of her parents. She'd scrubbed floors, polished silver, tended gardens, always hoping that her loyal service would earn her a place, even a small one, among the Fae. She'd never dared to dream of more, but 3 days ago she'd made a mistake. She'd been cleaning the High Lord's private study when Lady Isleen had entered unexpectedly. Abby had turned too quickly, knocking over an ancient vase that had shattered across the floor. The moment the pieces had touched her skin, they'd begun to glow with a strange, golden light that had made Isleen's eyes narrow with something that looked like fear. "What are you?" Isleen had demanded. "Nothing, my lady, I'm sorry. I'll clean it immediately." But Isleen had already been calling for the guards, demanding a blood test, spinning a story about how Abby had been attempting to steal magical artifacts. And now here Abby stood, condemned not for theft, but for the supposed crime of being mortal-born. "Abigail of no house," Dracos intoned. "You have been found to possess insufficient Fae blood to remain in the Twilight Court. For your deception and the pollution of our sacred halls, you are sentenced to the void. May the ancient darkness consume what little magic you possess." "I never lied! I never claimed to be—" Abby's protest died as the guards yanked her forward. The void portal's pull strengthened with each step, tugging at something deep in her chest. The crowd parted as they approached. Abby caught glimpses of faces she'd served for years. Lord Fenwick, whose chambers she'd cleaned every morning. Lady Mirth, whose gowns she'd mended. Commander Tallis, whose armor she'd polished until it gleamed. Not one of them met her eyes. The portal's edge drew close, and Abby could feel the wrongness of it, a vast emptiness that promised not just death, but erasure. To be cast into the void meant to be unmade, to have every trace of your existence scattered across dimensions until nothing remained. "Please don't do this," she whispered. "I'll leave. I'll go to the mortal realm. You'll never see me again." Isleen stepped forward, her hand resting possessively on the arm of a throne that didn't belong to her. The High Lord Saint had been away for months, leading the armies against the shadow beasts at the northern border. In his absence, Isleen had positioned herself as the power behind the council, whispering poison into their ears. "Oh, but we can't risk that, can we?" Isleen said, her smile sharp as a blade. "What if you run to the mortal kingdoms and tell them about our court? What if you breed and create more half-bloods who might try to infiltrate our halls? No, the void is the only certainty. Abby's mind raced. She'd heard stories about the void, whispers from older servants about fae who'd been cast through and never returned. But there were other stories too, older ones, about ancient magic that existed in the spaces between worlds, magic that predated the courts themselves. The guards positioned her at the portal's edge, the swirling darkness reflected in their blank expressions. They were spelled, Abby realized, compelled to obey without question or mercy. "Cast her through," Dracos ordered. The guard's hands released her arms, but before Abby could even think to run, they shoved her backward. She felt the portal's surface break around her like falling through ice, and then there was nothing but spinning darkness and the sensation of being pulled apart at the seams. The last thing she heard from the court was Isleen's laughter, bright and victorious. The void was cold. Not the cold of winter or mountain peaks, but an absence of warmth so complete it seemed to leach the heat from her very bones. Abby tumbled through emptiness, unable to tell up from down, unable to scream because there was no air to carry sound. She was dying. She could feel it. Her mortal body breaking down in a place where mortal flesh was never meant to exist. The edges of her vision darkened, and she wondered if this was what it meant to be unmade, to simply cease. But then something changed. Deep in her chest, where her heart should have been slowing, she felt a pulse of warmth. It was small at first, barely an ember, but it grew with each passing moment. Golden light began to seep from her skin, pushing back the void's darkness. Abby gasped as memories that weren't hers flooded her mind. Visions of a woman who looked like her but older, more regal, standing before a court far more ancient than the Twilight realm. The woman wore a crown of living starlight and spoke in a language Abby somehow understood. "My daughter," the vision woman said, reaching out with hands that were beginning to fade. "They took you from me before you could even speak. I hid your power so deep even you couldn't find it, praying it would keep you safe. But now..." The woman's form flickered like a candle in wind. "Now you must wake. The void recognizes true blood. Let it fuel what was always yours." The vision shattered, but the warmth remained. Abby felt something unlock inside her, a well of power so vast it made her previous existence feel like a dream. Magic erupted from her core, golden and radiant, illuminating the void with the light of 1,000 suns. She wasn't mortal. She'd never been mortal. She was Starborn, descended from the first fae who'd walked the realms before the courts divided, before the bloodlines grew proud and insular. Her mother had been the last Starborn queen, and someone had murdered her and hidden Abby away to prevent her from claiming her birthright. The void portal, designed to unmake lesser beings, had instead become a crucible. Abby's hidden power, compressed and sleeping for 20 years, exploded outward with the force of a supernova. She stopped tumbling and hung suspended in the darkness, no longer its victim, but its master. "You wanted to erase me," she said to the emptiness, to the court that had condemned her, to everyone who'd ever looked through her like she was nothing. "Let me show you what you've awakened." Abby reached out with her newfound power and seized the void portal itself, bending its energy to her will. The darkness responded like an eager hound, reshaping itself into a bridge of shadow and starlight. She stepped onto it and began to walk back toward the Twilight Court, each footfall sending ripples of golden magic cascading through the dimensional fabric. She could feel the portal's exit approaching, could sense the shock rippling through the court as impossible light began to bleed through from the void. They'd been waiting for silence, for confirmation of her erasure. Instead, they were about to receive a reckoning. Abby emerged from the void portal in an eruption of golden fire and silver lightning. The force of her return sent the nearest guards flying backward, their spelled compliance shattered by the sheer magnitude of power rolling off her in waves. The Hall of Stars filled with light bright enough to make the assembled Fae raise their hands to shield their eyes. When the glare faded enough to see, Abby stood at the portal's threshold, transformed. Her servant's rags had burned away, replaced by a gown that seemed woven from starlight itself. Her dark hair floated around her shoulders as if suspended in water, and her eyes, previously brown and unremarkable, now glowed with the molten gold of her true heritage. Most striking of all was the crown that had materialized on her head, formed from pure crystallized magic in the shape of stars and crescent moons. "Impossible," Dracos breathed, half rising from his seat. Isleen had gone white as fresh snow. "She's just a servant. She can't— This is a trick." "No trick," Abby said, her voice resonating with harmonics that made the very walls vibrate. "Just truth. I am Abigail Starborn, daughter of Queen Lyanna the Radiant, last of the ancient bloodline. And you—" She swept her gaze across the assembled court, lingering on Isleen and Dracos. "You tried to murder me." The court erupted into chaos. Nobles were shouting, guards were drawing weapons, and through it all, Isleen stood frozen at the base of the High Lord's throne, her face a mask of barely contained fury. "Hold!" The single word cut through the pandemonium like a blade through silk. Every voice fell silent. Every head turned toward the massive doors at the hall's entrance. High Lord Saint had returned. He strode into the Hall of Stars with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned his right to command. Saint was tall even among the Fae, his frame heavy with muscle earned through centuries of battle. His hair fell to his shoulders in waves of midnight black, and his eyes were the silver blue of glacial ice. He wore battle leathers still stained with shadow beast blood, and power radiated from him in palpable waves, the kind of ancient, bone-deep magic that came from a bloodline nearly as old as Abby's own. Those glacial eyes swept the hall, taking in the scene with predatory focus. The scattered guards, the shocked nobles, the void portal still crackling with residual energy. And finally, they landed on Abby, standing crowned in starlight with power swirling around her like a living storm. For a long moment, Saint simply stared. Then something shifted in his expression. Recognition, wonder, and beneath it all, a hunger that made Abby's breath catch in her throat. "Who are you?" Before Abby could answer, Isleen rushed forward, her composure cracking. "My lord, thank the stars you've returned. This servant girl has used some kind of dark magic to—" "I asked her, not you." Saint didn't even glance at Isleen. His focus remained fixed on Abby with an intensity that felt like standing in sunlight after years in shadow. Abby lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with a steadiness she'd never been allowed to show before. "I am Abigail Starborn. Your court tried to execute me for being mortal-born. They were mistaken." "Who ordered this?" The temperature in the hall dropped 10 degrees. Ice began to form on the pillars, creeping across the obsidian floor in crystalline patterns. Saint's power, usually kept under rigid control, was slipping its leash. Draco stood, attempting to regain control of the situation. "My lord, the blood test showed— Show me!" Isleen hesitated, then produced the crystal vial containing Abby's blood. It was still that muddy brown, devoid of silver. Saint took it from her, held it up to the light, and then did something that made several council members gasp. He shattered the vial in his hand, letting Abby's blood spill across his palm. The moment it touched his skin, the blood ignited with golden fire, revealing what had been hidden. Someone had tampered with it, layered glamours so sophisticated that only direct contact with another ancient bloodline would reveal the deception. Saint's expression went from cold to absolutely lethal. Who modified this blood? Silence. Then Isleen took a step backward, and that small movement was enough. Lady Isleen, you would care to explain. Isleen's face cycled through emotions too quickly to track. Fear, rage, calculation. Finally, she settled on defiance. She doesn't belong here. Starborn bloodline or not, she's been a servant for 20 years. You can't possibly expect the court to accept. I expect nothing from this court except an accounting, Abby interrupted. The golden light around her intensified, casting harsh shadows across the nobles' faces. Someone murdered my mother. Someone hid me in your servant quarters as an infant. Someone has been watching me for 20 years, waiting to eliminate me the moment I showed signs of power. She turned to face Isleen fully, and the truth crystallized with perfect, terrible clarity. It was you. You shattered that vase in Saint's study deliberately, knowing my touch would activate its magic. You needed an excuse to demand a blood test, and when my blood showed true, you poisoned it with glamours before presenting it to the council. Lies! I am a daughter of House Moonweaver, descended from lesser nobility, who's been grasping for power since before I was born, Abby finished. You thought if Saint returned to find me dead, you could finally claim the position you've been circling for decades. High Lady of the Twilight Court. Saint's magic exploded outward, coating the entire hall in frost. His voice, when he spoke, was barely above a whisper, but somehow more terrifying than any shout. You tried to execute my mate. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. What? Abby breathed. Saint moved toward her with the fluid grace of a predator, and the crowd parted before him like water. He didn't stop until he stood close enough that Abby could feel the chill rolling off his skin, could see the way his pupils had blown wide with something that was part rage and part wonder. I felt it the moment I entered this hall, he said, reaching out to touch the crown of starlight on her head. His fingers passed through the magical construct, and where they made contact, his ice-blue power twined with her golden fire, creating something entirely new. The pull, the recognition. You bear the mark of the first bonding. Abby's hand rose involuntarily to her collarbone, where she could suddenly feel a warmth she'd attributed to her awakened magic. When she pulled aside the neckline of her starlight gown, she saw it, a mark in the shape of a crescent moon intertwined with a star, glowing with merged golden and silver light. I don't understand. We've never even spoken before. Soul bonds don't require conversation, Saint said, his hand moving from her crown to cup her face with a tenderness that seemed impossible from someone radiating such deadly power. They require recognition. Your power was hidden, buried so deep even I couldn't sense it. But some part of me knew. Some part of me has been searching for 200 years, and I never understood why I couldn't bring myself to accept any of the matches proposed to me. He turned his head slightly, addressing the court without taking his eyes off Abby. Lady Isleen stands accused of blood magic, falsifying evidence, and attempted assassination of a Starborn heir. Does anyone dispute these charges? Dracos looked like he wanted to object, but one glance at the merged magic still swirling around Sainton Abbey made him sink back into his seat. No, my lord. Then I invoke the right of the challenged. Abigail Starborn, as the wronged party, you have the right to demand satisfaction. Abby understood immediately. Under ancient law, she could challenge Isleen to a duel, a magical combat to first blood, first yield, or first death, depending on the severity of the crime. Attempted murder of a sovereign heir typically warranted the latter. Part of her, the part that had spent 20 years scrubbing floors and swallowing humiliation, wanted to refuse. Violence had never been her nature. But another part, the part that was waking up with each pulse of starlight through her veins, understood that mercy here would be seen as weakness. Isleen had tried to erase her from existence. That demanded an answer written in power. I challenge Lady Isleen to a duel of magic, Abby declared. To first yield or first death, her choice. The court came alive with excited murmuring. Magical duels were rare, forbidden except under specific legal circumstances. To witness one between a newly awakened Starborn and a daughter of House Moonweaver would be the kind of spectacle they'd discuss for centuries. Isleen's face had gone from white to flushed with rage. You've been awake to your power for all of an hour, and you think you can face me. I've been training in combat magic since I was old enough to hold a wand. Then you should have no fear of accepting. The challenge is issued and witnessed, Saint said, stepping back but not far. He positioned himself close enough that Abby could feel his presence, like a warm wall at her back. Lady Isleen, you must accept or yield now and face exile. I accept, Isleen snarled. To first death! The crowd gasped. By choosing death over yield, Isleen had ensured that one of them would leave the hall in a body bag. It was a desperate, vicious choice, but then Isleen had everything to lose. The court arranged itself around the hall's center, where the floor was inlaid with circles of power specifically designed for duels. Abby stepped into the inner circle, feeling the ancient magic rise up to meet her own. Across from her, Isleen took her position, already gathering silver moonfire between her palms. Be careful, Saint murmured, his voice pitched for her ears alone. You belong to me now. I won't allow her to take what's mine. The words should have angered her. She'd just discovered her true heritage, claimed her power, and here was this male declaring ownership. But instead, they sent heat cascading through her veins. Because in the Fae world, such words weren't about control. They were about protection, about a promise that she would never face any threat alone again. I'll be careful, she promised. Saint's hand brushed against hers, a fleeting contact that sent sparks of magic dancing across both their skins. Then he withdrew to the circle's edge, leaving her to face her would-be murderer. Dracos raised his hand, his voice booming across the hall. Let the duel commence! Isleen struck first, sending a spear of moonfire hurtling toward Abby's chest. It was a killing blow, designed to pierce the heart and flash freeze everything it touched. 20 years ago, even 1 hour ago, Abby would have had no defense. But now, she raised her hand and the moonfire simply stopped, suspended in midair, trembling against the wall of starlight Abby had erected without even thinking about it. That's your opening move? Abby asked. After all your training? She flicked her wrist and the moonfire reversed course, shooting back toward Isleen twice as fast. The other woman barely managed to dive aside, her silver gown tearing as the magical spear grazed her shoulder. Isleen came up in a roll, both hands now blazing with power. She began to weave a complex spell, her fingers moving in patterns that left trails of light in the air. Abby recognized it from old texts she'd read while serving in the library. A binding curse meant to lock an opponent's magic inside their own body until it consumed them from within. I don't think so. Abby sang a single note, a sound that resonated with the frequency of creation itself. The binding curse shattered like glass, and Isleen stumbled backward with a cry of pain, her hands smoking where the backlash had hit her. You can't possibly! You're just a servant! I was never just anything, Abby said, advancing slowly. With each step, golden flowers bloomed beneath her feet, growing from the obsidian floor itself, an impossibility that made even the eldest nobles lean forward in their seats. I was hidden, suppressed, denied my birthright by someone who feared what I might become. Isleen launched a barrage of attacks, moonfire, ice shards, cutting winds infused with her family's silver magic. Each one was powerful enough to kill a lesser fae. Abby deflected them all with shields of starlight that seemed to cost her no effort whatsoever. Because this was the truth of Starborn magic. It didn't just rival the power of modern courts. It predated them. It was the source from which all other fae magic had eventually descended, diluted over generations of intermarriage and territorial division. This isn't fair! Isleen shrieked, blood now running from her nose where the magical backlash had ruptured vessels. I worked for my position. I trained for centuries. You're just some nobody who got lucky with her bloodline. Abby stopped advancing. She could end this now. One strike of concentrated starlight, and Isleen would be ash. But something in the other woman's words caught her attention, cutting through the rage to expose the wound beneath. You're right, Abby said. I didn't train for centuries. I didn't attend the academies or study under great masters. I learned magic from books I cleaned in the library, practicing in secret after you were all asleep. Isleen stared at her, chest heaving, magic flickering weakly around her hands. But I'm not lucky, Abby continued. I'm Starborn. That means something older than your house, older than these courts, older than the divisions we've used to separate worthy from unworthy magic. You tried to kill me not because I was weak, but because deep down, you knew I wasn't. She raised both hands, and the starlight surrounding her condensed into a single point of brilliant, terrible radiance. Yield, Isleen. You've lost. For a moment, Isleen wavered. Pride warred with survival instinct across her features. Then, at the last second, she made a choice that was somehow more vicious than continued combat. I yield, she gasped out. But know this, Starborn. You may have power, but you'll never have their respect. They'll never forget you were a servant who scrubbed their floors. Abby absorbed the words, let them settle somewhere in her chest. Then she smiled, not kindly, but with the serene confidence of someone who'd already faced the worst and survived it. I don't need their respect, she said. I have something better. I have the truth of what I am. She turned to face the assembled court, hundreds of immortal faces watching with expressions ranging from awe to fear, to grudging admiration. Let me be clear about something. I'm not here to beg for acceptance into your ranks. I'm not here to prove I'm worthy of a seat at your table. Abby let her power flare, filling the Hall of Stars with golden radiance that made their silver magic look pale and thin by comparison. I am Abigail Starborn, and my bloodline held dominion when your ancestors were still learning to kindle their first flames. You will respect me, not because I ask it, but because I have earned it, through survival, through power, and through right of blood. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Draco seemed at a loss for words. Then Saint stepped forward into the dueling circle, breaking the formal protocol that said he should wait until the circle was cleared. He moved directly to Abby's side, his hand finding hers with a certainty that suggested he'd been waiting his entire life to stand exactly here. I claim Abigail Starborn as my mate, he declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. She bears my mark, and I bear hers. By the old laws and the ancient bonds, I declare her High Lady of the Twilight Court. Magic erupted from where their hands joined, his ice blue power and her golden starlight twining together in a display that made the very foundations of the hall tremble. On Abby's collarbone, the crescent moon and star mark blazed with light. An answering mark appeared on Saint's chest, visible through the open collar of his battle leathers, a matching symbol that proclaimed their bond to anyone with eyes to see. Any who challenge her, challenge me, Saint continued. Any who threaten her will answer to both our powers, and any who attempt to undermine her position will find themselves joining Lady Isleen in exile. Dracos rose slowly from his seat. The High Counselor looked like he'd aged a century in the past hour, but there was something in his expression that might have been relief. The High Lord has spoken. Lady Abigail Starborn is recognized as High Lady of the Twilight Court. He paused, then added with what sounded like genuine respect. Long may she reign. The court echoed the sentiment, some voices enthusiastic, others grudging, but all of them loud enough to shake the rafters. Long may she reign! Abby felt the weight of it settle onto her shoulders. Not the burden she'd expected, but something that felt almost like coming home. Saint's hand squeezed hers, his thumb tracing patterns across her knuckles that sent shivers up her arm. Breathe, he murmured. You look like you're about to pass out. An hour ago I was scrubbing floors, she pointed out. Now I'm High Lady of the Twilight Court and apparently soul bonded to you. Forgive me if I need a moment to adjust. Saint's laugh was low and rich, a sound that did dangerous things to her equilibrium. Take all the time you need. We have eternity. The word, eternity, hit her like a physical blow, because that was what the soul bond meant. Not just a political alliance or even a romantic partnership, but an intertwining of lives so complete that one could not survive without the other. If Isleen's strike had killed her, Saint would have followed within hours, his magic consuming him from the inside out. You don't even know me, Abby said. What if we're not compatible? What if the bond made a mistake? Saint turned her to face him, his hands coming up to frame her face with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone so fierce. The bond doesn't make mistakes, he said. I've watched you for years, Abby. Even when your power was hidden, I saw you. Your kindness when you thought no one was looking. Your strength in the face of casual cruelty. The way you found joy in small things, a perfect flower in the garden, a particularly beautiful sunset. You noticed me? I couldn't stop noticing you, he admitted. It drove me mad, this pull towards someone who seemed so far beneath my station. I thought I was going insane, developing some kind of inappropriate fixation. Now I understand. My soul recognized yours, even when I couldn't. He leaned closer, his forehead coming to rest against hers. You are magnificent, Abigail Starborn, and I am honored beyond measure to call you mine. The kiss, when it came, was inevitable. Abby rose on her toes to meet him halfway, and the moment their lips touched, the world exploded into golden blue light. Their merged magic cascaded outward in waves, reshaping the Hall of Stars into something that matched their combined vision. Obsidian and starlight, ice and fire, ancient power made manifest. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Abby realized that the assembled court had fallen to their knees. Not in forced submission, but in genuine reverence for the display of power they'd just witnessed. Saint kept one arm wrapped around her waist, holding her steady as she struggled to process everything. Well, he said, addressing the court with barely contained amusement, I believe we have some arrangements to make, starting with a proper coronation ceremony and a full investigation into Queen Lyanna's death. And trials for anyone found complicit, Abby added, finding her voice again. My mother deserves justice. She'll have it. I promise you that. Over the next several hours, as the court gradually dispersed and servants scrambled to prepare for an impromptu coronation ceremony, Abby learned more about the mate she'd been bonded to seemingly by fate itself. Saint, whose full name was St. Allian Frostvale, though he'd long since abandoned the surname in favor of the simpler title, was nearly 3,000 years old, one of the eldest and most powerful High Fae still walking the realms. He'd been born during the last age of the Starborn queens, before the division of the courts, and had witnessed the slow fracturing of unity into territorial warfare. He'd known her mother, Lyanna, though only briefly. She was magnificent, he told Abby as they walked through the palace gardens, finally alone after hours of political maneuvering. Powerful beyond measure, but also kind. When she disappeared 26 years ago, we searched everywhere. We found her body eventually, poisoned with iron and dark magic, but never any trace of a child. Someone hid me well. Too well. But we'll find out who. I've already set my best investigators on the task. They walked in silence for a moment, following a path between beds of night-blooming flowers that released their fragrance into the cool air. Abby's mind was still reeling, trying to reconcile her new reality with the one she'd lived for 20 years. What if I'm not good at this? She asked quietly. Being High Lady, I mean. I don't know politics or court intrigue. I don't know how to lead. Saint stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. Neither did I when I first took power. Leadership isn't about knowing everything. It's about surrounding yourself with good advisors and having the wisdom to listen. He reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. You have good instincts, Abby. You showed mercy to Isleen when you could have killed her. That speaks to the kind of ruler you'll be. Or it speaks to weakness. Mercy is never weakness. Cruelty is easy. Mercy requires strength. Abby wanted to believe him, wanted to believe she could step into this role and not just survive, but thrive. But doubt was a familiar companion, one she'd carried for 20 years. Saint seemed to sense her internal struggle. "Come with me," he said, offering his hand. "I want to show you something." He led her deeper into the gardens, past the cultivated beds into an area where the plants grew wild and untamed. At the heart of this wilderness stood a tree unlike any Abby had ever seen. Its trunk was silver white like birch, but its leaves glowed with soft golden light that illuminated the surrounding area. "What is it?" "A starborn tree, the last one in existence, planted by your mother when she first came to this court." He guided Abby closer until she could place her hand on the smooth bark. "It's been dying slowly since she was murdered. Our best gardeners couldn't save it. But look!" Where Abby's palm pressed against the trunk, new growth was already spiraling outward. Fresh, golden leaves unfurling with impossible speed, new branches reaching toward the sky. The tree recognized her, welcomed her, responded to her presence with the kind of vitality it hadn't shown in over 2 decades. "It knows me." "Your mother's legacy knows you. And it's telling you that you belong here, Abby. You always did." Tears pricked at her eyes, and she didn't fight them. For 20 years, she'd felt like an imposter, a pretender trying to fit into a world that would never truly accept her. But here, with starlight crown on her head and her soulmate at her side, and her mother's tree blooming at her touch, she finally felt like she'd found her place. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself." Saint stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her from behind so they both faced the growing tree. "Always," he promised, "for as long as we both shall live, and beyond that into whatever comes next." The coronation ceremony 3 days later was nothing like Abby had imagined. Instead of the austere, formal affair she'd witnessed from the servants' quarters, it was a celebration that lasted from sunset to dawn. The entire court turned out in their finest, and representatives from neighboring realms arrived bearing gifts and offers of alliance. Abby stood before the assembled crowd, wearing a gown of white starlight that seemed to shift and shimmer with her every breath. The crown on her head was no longer the rough manifestation of power from her awakening, but a delicate construction of gold and diamonds that had been in Lyanna's family for 10,000 years, recovered from a vault that had only opened to Abby's touch. Saint stood beside her, resplendent in midnight blue formal robes that made his ice blue eyes seem to glow. When Dracos placed the ceremonial scepter in Abby's hands and proclaimed her High Lady before all witnesses, Saint's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that spoke volumes. "I present High Lady Abigail Starborn," Saint declared, his voice carrying across the packed hall. "Sovereign of the Twilight Court, keeper of the ancient magic, and my bonded mate." The court erupted into cheers and applause. Even nobles who'd been skeptical seemed genuinely moved by the display of their merged power, the way golden starlight and ice blue magic danced together in the air above them, creating patterns of breathtaking beauty. But the moment Abby cherished most came later, after the formal ceremony ended and the celebration began. She and Saint escaped to a balcony overlooking the palace grounds, stealing a moment of privacy amidst the chaos. "It's real, isn't it?" Abby said, looking out at the realm that was now partially hers to protect and govern. "This isn't going to disappear. I'm not going to wake up back in the servants' quarters." Saint moved behind her, his arms coming around her waist to pull her back against his chest. "It's real. You're real. This He gestured to the mark on her collarbone, still visible above the gown's neckline, glowing softly in the moonlight. This is real. You're mine, and I'm yours, and nothing in any realm can change that. Abby turned in his arms, rising on her toes to kiss him with all the passion and gratitude and wonder she felt. When they broke apart, both breathless, she had one more question. What happens now? Saint's smile was tender and full of promise. Now we rule together. We investigate your mother's murder and bring her killers to justice. We strengthen the court and prove to neighboring realms that the Starborn have returned. He paused, his expression shifting to something warmer, more intimate. And we build a life together, one day at a time, for the rest of eternity. I like the sound of that. Good, because you're stuck with me now. Abby laughed, the sound bright and genuine and free of the shadows that had haunted her for so long. Below them, the celebration continued, music and laughter and the ring of crystal goblets raised in endless toasts. Above them, stars wheeled across the sky in patterns that seemed to echo the magic flowing between them. She'd been cast through the void as punishment, expected to die unmade and forgotten. Instead, she'd walked back crowned in ancient magic, claimed by a mate who saw her worth when no one else had, and elevated to a position that would let her reshape the very court that had tried to erase her. You know what the best part is? Abby said. What? Isleen has to watch all of this from exile, knowing she created the very thing she feared most by trying to destroy me. Saint's laugh was rich and dark. Remind me never to cross you, my terrifying mate. Too late. You're soul bonded to me. There's no escape now. I wouldn't want one. They stood together on the balcony as the celebration stretched into dawn. Two souls that had found each other against all odds. Two powers that merged into something greater than either could achieve alone. And when the first rays of morning sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, Abby finally allowed herself to believe in the truth Saint had been trying to tell her all along. She was exactly where she belonged. She was home. What do you think about the story? Let me know your comments. I would appreciate each of your thoughts. Also, comment which state you're watching from so I can give you a shout out on the next videos. Don't forget to subscribe so you can stay updated on our next uploads. Thanks for watching!